On our interview today, we have with us Danai Angeli, lawyer and PhD candidate at the European Institute in Florence. She works as a researcher in the MIDAS Project, assessing the cost-effectiveness on irregular migration control policies in Greece, and she has provided legal representation to irregular migrants in several cases before the European Court of Human Rights, and recently acted as a chair of the appeal committees of the new Asylum Service in Greece. Mrs. Angeli, good afternoon, kalispera.
Good afternoon.
With the implementation of the new Asylum Service, the rate of asylum recognition increased from less than 1% in 2012 to more than 14% in only 1 year, which is a substantial progress. How is it working, this new service and their offices, such as the First Reception Service and the Appeals Authority?
Okay, well, it is a significant improvement. The new Asylum Service is a significant improvement compared to the previous system that was available. Under the previous one, the examination of the asylum applications was in the hands of the police, and this was considered highly problematic because there was often a lack of background on refugee law and so on. The new Asylum Service is a very big investment. From my experience, I worked in the appeals authorities, so I was examining asylum applications at second instance. I can say, like from my experience, that interviews do take place. They are very thorough. So from a procedural perspective, we have a big improvement. However, there is still much to be done. Access to asylum is still not open to everybody. There is still a very, very limited number of asylum applications registered per week. A very large number of asylum applicants do not have access to the asylum system, so they're not registered asylum seekers, and they are treated as irregular migrants. Other than that, due to lack of funding, because the authorities have prioritized other aspects, there is a lack of interpreters already after 1 year of functioning of the new Asylum Service. And the second instance, so the appeal committees, they used to be 19 committees in the first year. Now they have already dropped to 10, and this is due to lack of funding. So the recognition rate has increased, but we still cannot say that Greece has a fair and effective asylum system as the EU asylum acquis precondition.
Yeah, on the presentation of the new Asylum Service, the Associate Protection Officer of the United Nations Agency for Refugees, Mr. Petros Mastakas, said that the establishment of a fair and efficient asylum procedure is an obligation of the Greek state. We don't know if he was talking about the funding, or are you agreed that it's only a Greek issue?
No, a fair and effective asylum system it's an obligation on many levels. From an international human rights law perspective, persons in need of international protection must have access to an effective asylum system. From a European perspective, the EU directive, so the qualification, it does place the obligation for a fair and effective asylum system. Even under the Greek law, everybody has the right, every regular migrant, let's say third country national, has the right to ask for asylum. The problem is not so much that, let's say, the legislative framework, but rather the implementation. And both through the research now and from my experience, both as a lawyer at NGOs and as myself being employed in the Asylum Service, there is a serious lack of funding. During my year, the first year that I worked there, twice we were unable to conduct interviews because there were no interpreters. And we had to rely on volunteers or on outside people to come and interpret. This is not an effective and fair asylum system, and there are no procedural safeguards when, for example, there is no interpretation. So it is a legal obligation. The legal framework is there, but we have a problem in implementing it.
Yeah, about this implementation that we are talking, Greece maybe did some contradictory measures. For example, the legal council of the state decided recently that the detention can be extended a maximum of 18 months or even indefinite in some cases. And the Greek government also increased the number of detention places, the capacity, from 6,000 to more than 10,000 in the last year. So it's a bit opposite to the United Nations indications.
Yes, detention is probably one of the biggest weakness, if not the biggest weakness, of both the Greek irregular migration management policy and the asylum management policy. Under international law and under EU law and even under Greek law, before this opinion by the Legal Council of State, the detention is an exceptional measure. It's a last resort measure that can only be applied under very, very particular circumstances. For example, the person is considered a danger to public order, if there is a risk of absconding, and only as long as a return procedure is in process of being implemented. So that it's a very, very strict framework. Since at least 2008, Greece is treating detention as the main policy tool to manage irregular migration. So detention is systematic, it's indiscriminate. So irregular migrants rounded up end up in detention without often a screening taking place and without controlling if the requirements are met. Now, in February 2014, the Legal Council of State issued an advisory opinion following a request by the Greek police itself, saying that it's fine for the Greek police to exceed 18 months, which is the maximum allowed duration of detention under EU law, and to detain migrants indefinitely as long as they voluntarily consent to the return. So this was actually the phrasing of the council itself. It's an advisory opinion, which means it's actually not legally binding, but the police are implementing it. This policy is not in compliance with EU law, and it's a matter of time before it gets actually challenged before at EU level or international level. The Greek courts themselves have disagreed. So migrants who have been detained beyond 18 months and who challenged their detention before Greek courts, they have won their case and they were released. So it's a very now, it's a situation that we hope will resolve itself very quickly. On the other hand, it has led the authorities to really invest in detention centers. So over the past year, so the initial plan was to create 10,000 places of detention. Now it has been diminished to 7,500. But it's a very, very big financial investment. Like in the course of the MIDAS project, we calculated that Greece had invested at least 20 million euros between 2008 and 2013 to renovate detention centers. And suffice to say that the renovation is very basic. The CPT committee every year finds the Greek detention centers to be inadequate, to be inappropriate. So detention is a really problematic issue, both from the perspective of legality, but also from this financial and political risk that it has brought. Political, because it's a matter of time before a European court or the European Commission find Greece to be in violation of its EU obligation or human rights obligation. And financial risk, because detention is very, very costly. Right now, we calculated that at least 28 million euros per year are being invested for the detention of 5,000 people. And this is only the 5,000. I don't talk about police stations, some other kind of holding facilities, border guard units. I talk only about one category of removal centers. So we consider detention to really put at risk the whole policy, the whole Greek policy towards managing irregular migration.
Yeah, and also according to the United Nations, there is another problem that it's, for example, there are detentions for up to 18 months in police station cells, which are designed for a maximum of a few days. You, as a lawyer, think that it's a breach of the human rights?
Yes, it is anyways a breach of human rights to detain anybody in conditions that are inappropriate. Police stations in Greece are not meant for detention. They can be used even under the Greek law as a temporary, for just a couple of days maybe. I have seen cases of people who have been detained there for months, 5 months, 8 months. Very often a police station, when we talk about detention in police station, we talk about a room that is underground, no access even to natural light. Even access to a bathroom can be monitored. Like it's not, you don't always have free access to a bathroom. I don't even talk about access to outdoors and all the other requirements under human rights law. So detention in police stations can no longer be continued. The Greek government persistently denies that it's holding persons for prolonged times in detention centers, but the CPT committee itself has confirmed that this is a practice that happens. So it is definitely a breach of human rights to detain a person under inappropriate conditions. Of course, a police station that is not even meant to provide this kind of facilities to a detainee, that is definitely not live up to Greece's human rights obligations.
So it seems clear that there is a violation of the human rights, and it is also clear that the Greek government has funding, at least to found this detention center. So it seems that the legal frame and the funding is there, and then how is the problem to have a good implementation of the European and international policies about migration?
Like we have looked into alternative measures. For example, there are one is the open accommodation or the semi-open accommodation facilities. One thing that must be clear is that you detain a person when there is a reason actually to detain him. And a migrant that enters Greece irregularly is not a criminal, is not an offender, he's not a criminal. He is detained because of an administrative violation. So he must be treated accordingly. To detain everybody indiscriminately just does not work, both legally and financially. Alternative schemes that we have looked into is the first reception, which basically are meant to replace police stations, to replace border guard units, where newcomers enter, a screening takes place, they are provided information about the migration system, about the international protection system, and so on. Then there are the open accommodation and semi-open accommodation facilities, in particular for families, minors, vulnerable cases. And then there are also surveillance schemes that have been tried in Germany, Belgium, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, and they have had good results. And Greece could look into these kind of cases. And then, of course, there are other alternatives, like early legal advice, language courses, and so on, where Greece could invest instead of a policy like detention that is just illegal.
Is working the appeals authority for the next year improve the situation of these detention camps and to get more open accommodations?
Greece has committed itself, instead of 10,000 places, to create 7,500 places of detention. And it has also committed itself, and this is the latest information, that we have, instead of 1,000 places of open accommodation that are running now, to create 2,000. And then there is a plan also for reception centers. All this is in the making. No funding has been secured. On the other hand, funding has been secured to increase the detention places. So, in paper, what Greece has committed itself, is not sufficient, because 2,000 places of open accommodation for, let's say, the 8,000 Syrians that entered last year, Greece is obviously not enough. So even the plan to have 7,500 places of detention versus the 2,000 of open accommodation, it's very clear where the priority lies. So we don't see any change there. The change is minimal, basically. And then we also see that the reception centers, even though it's very clear that it is in the obligation of Greece to create reception centers, the information we have so far is that no funding has been secured.
So you think that these detention measures are an effect of the Dublin regulations? So Greek government is the response of the Greek government against this European regulation?
Yes, to change the Dublin II regulation, it's a persistent call from Greece. The EU member states have so far, even after MSS versus Belgium and Greece, the conviction, there is no so far movement or no willingness from other EU member states to change the Dublin II regulation. What is happening in practice is that just migrants who enter Greece and then they move to other European countries, for now, other European countries are not returning them to Greece, but this is temporary. We do think that the Dublin II regulation is extremely problematic, and I think that some solution might lie in the temporary protection directive, which is a directive that, if enacted, it would allow a fairer sharing of burdens. So it would allow migrants who enter Greece under specific conditions to be distributed to other EU member states. So I think there is some movement in this direction. But definitely the Dublin II regulation is, and in this respect the EU policy, is very much to blame about the approach that Greece is following towards irregular migrants.
Okay, we need to finish, Mrs. Angeli. Thank you very much for your collaboration with our program, That's Borders, and we were listening the Greek lawyer Danai Angeli giving details about the implementation of the new Asylum Service in Greece and more about the Greece policies about migration.